My name's Brian Rusk. I was 36 years old when it happened. I remember that weekend better than anything else in my life, and not for the right reasons. I was living in southern Ohio back then, in a small town near the Kentucky border. I'd been working construction for years and had finally taken a week off after finishing a long contract up north. I'd been planning a solo camping trip for a while, just a quiet weekend in nature. No phones, no noise, no people. I picked a state forest I hadn't been to before, Bear Creek State Forest. It wasn't as busy as Hocking Hills or some of the other parks in the area, and that was exactly what I wanted. Less traffic, less noise. I checked the maps and found a few backpacking sites off the trail. You had to hike in about 2 or 3 miles to reach them. There weren't many online reviews, but the few that existed said it was peaceful and remote. That sounded perfect. I packed light but smart tent, food, water purifier, some freeze-dried meals, basic first aid, knife, headlamp, and some extra batteries. I had a Garmin GPS too, one of those handheld models. It wasn't super new, but it worked. I double-checked all my gear the night before and left early that Friday morning. The drive was quiet, mostly back roads and winding hills. I pulled into the lot around 9 in the morning. There was only one other car there, an old dark blue SUV that looked like it hadn't been moved in days. Dust all over it. No stickers or tags on the windows. I didn't think much of it. People sometimes hike longer trails, leave their cars for days. I signed in at the trail register near the ranger post, which was empty. The book was barely used, only a few names scribbled in there over the last month. I added my name and the date, marked my destination as Campsite 4. I remember my handwriting being messy that day from the cold. It was late October, just starting to really feel like fall. The hike in was great, quiet, cool air, leaves everywhere. The trees had that golden red look to them, and every now and then I'd spot deer up the ridge. I didn't see another soul the entire time. After about 2.5 hours of hiking up and down a couple small ridges, I reached the site. It was tucked back just beyond a little creek, about 100 yards off the trail. There was a clearing for the tent and a fire ring made of rocks. No picnic table or anything fancy, just raw, peaceful wilderness. I set up my tent just before noon, gathered some firewood from the area, and filtered water from the creek. Everything was smooth. I remember sitting there for a while doing nothing, just sitting, listening to the birds and the breeze, feeling my body settle down after months of noise. I made a small fire around 4 and cooked one of those freeze-dried pasta meals. After dinner, I hiked back up the trail a bit and watched the sun go down through the trees. It got dark quickly. Too quickly, actually. I had to use my headlamp on the way back. Still, it felt safe. Remote, but safe. That first night, I slept okay. Not great, but okay. I heard coyotes howling far off around 2 a.m., but they never got close. At some point, maybe around 4, I thought I heard a snapping branch. One of those quick cracks like when you step on something dry. I sat up in my bag and listened for a while, but nothing followed it. No footsteps, no animals, no more snaps. I told myself it was probably a branch falling. Happens all the time. Next morning, I had coffee and oatmeal. The air was colder, and there was a layer of frost on my tent's rainfly. My plan was to take a day hike down a different trail that looped around to an old fire road. I left my bigger pack behind and just took my small day bag. Brought a map, the GPS, some snacks, and my water gear. It was quiet again. I passed an old deer stand up in a tree at one point, which I marked on the GPS just for fun. By mid-afternoon, I was back at camp. Everything looked fine. Nothing disturbed. I collected more firewood and sat down with my boots off for a while. That was when I noticed the footprints. At first, I thought they were mine. I'd walked down by the creek earlier that morning, filling up water and rinsing out my pot. But these weren't mine. They were deeper, longer strides, and they came from a different direction. from the woods. They came toward the camp, not away from it. I followed them a few steps. They curved behind my tent, stopped for a bit right behind it, then disappeared into the thicker trees west of the creek. I felt a tightness in my chest. It was too late in the season for this to be a ranger or some casual hiker, especially way off the main trail. I hadn't seen anyone since I arrived. No voices, no crunching boots, no signs of people. Just those footprints, clear in the muddy leaves. I walked a wide circle around the area, maybe a quarter-mile out, just looking. I didn't see anyone. No tents. No other signs. But now I was on edge. Every little noise got my attention. Every woodpecker tap sounded like a boot step. I told myself again it could have been a hunter. Maybe they just passed through, saw the camp, and left. But that didn't explain why they stopped behind my tent, or why they didn't announce themselves, or why I hadn't heard them. I stayed close to camp that evening, cooked another meal, this time barely touching it. Fire burning low, I kept my knife out and my light nearby. I didn't sleep that night. I laid there with my ears wide open. Leaves rustled outside now and then, and once, just once, I heard something walk past, slow and steady. I didn't move, just laid there staring up at the dark inside of the tent. It didn't stop, didn't come closer, just kept walking off into the trees. When the sun came up, I packed fast. I wanted out. I didn't even make breakfast. I just shoved everything in my pack, stomped out the fire, and started hiking back. But it wasn't the trail I came in on. I knew where I was going, or at least I thought I did. My GPS was glitching. It would point one direction, then shift wildly the other way. I followed the trail markings instead, the faded blue blazes on the trees. After maybe an hour, the trail just stopped. There wasn't a downed tree, no landslide or washout. It just ended. No more blazes, no more worn path. I backtracked and tried to find the last known marker. I found it, then saw what looked like another blaze a few dozen feet off to the side. I followed that. It wasn't a blaze. It was just paint, old and peeling, from some logger's mark. I kept moving, figuring I could follow the terrain north and loop back toward the lot. But the ridges all started to look the same. The sun was up high now, and I started sweating. I checked the GPS again. Still spinning, no signal. I tried my phone, 1 bar, no data. Then I saw the tarp. It was maybe 30 yards out, half buried behind a fallen tree. Blue plastic, old and sun-bleached. I walked over to it slowly. There were beer cans around and a ripped-up sleeping bag. The tarp covered a shallow pit, dug into the side of a hill, maybe to block wind. Looked like someone had been using it to sleep there. But what bothered me most was the knife stuck in a tree nearby. Not like someone forgot it. It had been driven into the bark, deep, almost angry, and next to it, a small animal skull hung from a piece of fishing line. I don't know if it was for decoration or intimidation, but I didn't stay to find out. I turned and started heading the opposite way. That's when I heard someone yell. A single word. Far off, but not far enough. My body froze. Then I ran. I don't know how far or how long. My legs felt like rubber. I tripped more than once, scraped my hands, lost my water bottle. Eventually, I came across the old fire road I'd seen on the map. I followed it fast, almost stumbling down the hill. After nearly an hour of moving that way, I saw the edge of the ranger station clearing. The SUV was still there. No one else. I didn't even go to the trail register. I just got in my truck and drove until I hit cell signal again. I didn't report it right away. I was too wired, too unsure if I'd imagined parts of it. But the next day, I called the ranger office and left a message. I told them the rough coordinates of that tarp and what I saw. They never called me back. I checked online a week later. The trail was marked, closed due to maintenance. That was it. No news reports, no missing person alerts. Just gone. I haven't gone camping since. I still hike sometimes, but only in busy places with other people around. I double-check my GPS. I carry a personal locator beacon now, and I don't go off-trail, ever. That weekend changed something in me. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted, but I know I wasn't supposed to be near that tarp. And I know someone else was watching me the whole time. It was early October 2021 when I finally got a few days off work. I'd been working long shifts at a repair shop in Boise, Idaho. I was 31, living alone, no kids, not much family left except a few cousins I didn't talk to much. I wanted to spend my break outdoors, far from the noise, the people, the machines, just air, trees, and the quiet. I picked a place I'd never been before, a long hiking trail near the Payette National Forest, a few hours north of the city. The locals called it the Summit Cut Loop. It wasn't on many maps anymore, and I only heard about it from an older guy who came into the shop one day for a tire rotation. Said the trail was beautiful but tough, with very little traffic. That's what sold me on it, no people. I packed light but smart. Sleeping bag, tent, water filter, dry food, compact stove, flashlight, lighter, first aid kit, compass, and an old army knife I'd had since I was a teenager. I didn't bring a gun. I don't hunt and never felt the need to carry. I figured I'd be gone 3 days, maybe 4, depending on how long I wanted to stick around. I drove up early in the morning, parked near a faded wooden sign that had the trail name carved into it, and checked the weather one last time on my phone. Clear skies all week. Good enough. I left the car around 8 a.m. and started walking. The trail started wide and open, with yellow leaves falling around me like snow. The air smelled clean and cold. It felt like the kind of quiet you don't get in the city, where even silence has a sound. I didn't see a single person for the first several hours, which was exactly what I wanted. By late afternoon, I'd covered maybe 10 miles. I found a small clearing near a stream and set up camp. I boiled water, made some instant rice with dried vegetables, and sat on a log until it got too cold to stay out. Then I crawled into my sleeping bag and listened to the wind. That first night was peaceful. I slept hard and woke up before the sun. I had a little instant coffee, packed up my gear, and kept going. The trail got narrower and rougher, climbing into thicker forest. Fallen trees blocked the path in a few places, and I had to detour around them. I saw a couple of deer, heard woodpeckers, and saw fresh scat that looked like it belonged to a black bear. But I wasn't too worried. I made noise as I walked, enough to let anything nearby know I was around. Around noon, the trail split. One part seemed newer, worn by recent hikers heading up a steeper incline. The other path was older, barely there, buried under leaves and branches. My map didn't show the split. I remembered the guy at the shop saying something about a shortcut that ran along a ridge, gave you better views. I figured that was the older path. I took the older path. That was the first real mistake. After an hour, the trail was almost gone. I kept going, figuring I'd rejoin the main loop eventually. My GPS app lost signal around then, so I switched to the compass. I tried to keep going north-northeast like the map suggested, but the trees grew tighter, and the ground got rocky, uneven, and harder to walk on. I stopped seeing any signs of old trail at all. By the time I realized I might be lost, it was already getting dark. I didn't panic. I'd been hiking alone for years and knew that freaking out only made things worse. I set up camp again in a small dip between hills, ate some crackers and beef jerky, and wrote down my position in a small notebook using my compass bearings. I planned to backtrack in the morning. That second night was different. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something in the woods. Not animals, not wind, something else, like soft, slow movement, just outside the ring of my flashlight beam. A couple times I sat up and shined the light all around, but saw nothing. I told myself it was just nerves, the cold, maybe a porcupine or a raccoon, but I didn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time. When I woke up at dawn, I found something I hadn't noticed before. There were boot prints near my tent. Not mine. I wear size 11 hiking boots. These were smaller. Size 9 maybe. The tread was different too, flatter, older looking. Like work boots. I couldn't tell how many there were, but I could see them clearly in the damp soil about 10 feet away, near the edge of camp. They hadn't been there the night before. I was sure of it. I didn't eat breakfast. I packed fast and started back in the direction I thought I came from. I couldn't find my old footprints. I tried to follow the same slope, the same light between the trees, but nothing looked right. I walked all day without finding the trail. By late afternoon, I was deeper into the woods than I wanted to be, surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked out most of the sky. Everything started to look the same. I was tired, dehydrated, and sore. My left knee had started aching, probably from stepping wrong on a rock earlier that day. I found a small overhang near some boulders and decided to stop there for the night. I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to attract anything or anyone. That night, I kept my knife in my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep, not even a minute. I heard footsteps, not animals, not birds or squirrels or deer. Footsteps, slow, measured, heavy enough to sound human but not running, just moving around the edge of my camp. And breathing. I didn't move. I didn't unzip my bag or grab my light. I just laid there, knife in hand, waiting. The sounds went on for maybe 20 minutes, maybe longer. Then nothing. When morning came, I found more prints. This time they circled the camp. I knew then that someone was out there, following me, watching me, maybe even walking parallel during the day. I didn't eat. I just drank a little filtered stream water, repacked, and kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just moved east, hoping to hit a road or a trail or anything. The forest began to thin out after a few hours. That gave me hope. But then I started seeing things that didn't belong. Rope tied around a tree, frayed and gray, looked like it had been there for a long time. An old tin can hanging from a branch by a string. Empty, rusted, no label. Then a jacket, just hanging on a nail hammered into a tree. A green canvas jacket with no sleeves. I kept going. A little while later, I found the first sign of real trouble. It was a campsite, but not like mine. No tent, just a bunch of tarps stretched between trees. Torn, sun-faded. A fire pit filled with old bones, maybe deer, maybe something else. Hard to tell. There were clothes scattered around the ground. Jeans, a shirt, socks. All worn, all dirty, stiff with age. And something worse. Camera. I picked it up. No battery. Just a cracked screen and a memory card slot. No way to check it out here. Next to it was a wallet. Moldy, half-eaten by bugs, but still had an ID inside. A guy named Colin Masters, from Twin Falls, age 27. Expiration date on the license, 2016. I backed away and kept walking. I didn't want to be anywhere near that camp. By nightfall, I found a dry patch near a large tree and made a small shelter out of my tarp. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I kept my knife in hand and stared into the dark. That night, I heard something again. Not just footsteps, a snapping branch, then another, closer this time. I stayed completely still. Whoever it was didn't come into the camp, but they stayed just far enough to let me know they were there, watching, waiting. When dawn came, I left again. No food, no water, just walking. My body was giving out, muscles stiff, head pounding, lips cracked. I had to keep stopping every hour to rest. Around midday, I found what looked like an old ATV trail, deep grooves in the dirt. It gave me some hope, so I followed it. 2 hours later, I saw a fence, barbed wire, old, running in both directions. It didn't matter. It was man-made. It meant I was near something. I followed it south until I hit a gate. Locked but climbable. I got over it and kept walking. Eventually, I found a dirt road and a cabin. It looked abandoned at first. Broken windows, moss on the shingles, grass 2 feet high. But smoke was coming from the chimney. I didn't go near it. Instead, I stayed low, circled wide, and kept following the road until I found another gate. This one open, and beyond it, a gravel path that led to a small fire station. I was safe. The ranger who found me said I'd come out nearly 12 miles south of the trailhead. They gave me water, food, and checked my vitals. I didn't tell them everything, just said I got lost and wandered for 3 nights. I left out the footsteps, the campsite, the old ID. When they gave me my phone back after charging it, I pulled out the memory card from the camera and slid it in. It had over 80 photos. Only a few showed people. A man, maybe in his 30s, with a thick beard and a dirty flannel shirt. Some of the pictures were blurry. In some, he was just standing in the woods, watching someone. In a few photos, it looked like he was dragging something. I gave the card to the ranger. I don't know what they did with it. I never went back to that forest again. I moved 6 months later, took a job in Oregon. Still work with my hands, but I haven't gone camping since. Sometimes I still think about the trail, the broken camp, the boots circling my tent, and I wonder how many others went off the path and never came back. I was 34 when I decided to go on a solo camping trip in northern England. It was late September 2016, a bit past the peak season, but I wanted the peace and quiet that came with the off time. I'd been through a tough few months. Work stress, breakup, a recent fallout with a close friend. So I figured a few nights out in nature would help me reset. I didn't want a crowded campground or anything organized. Just a quiet patch of land where I could switch off and breathe for a while. I chose a spot not far from the Lake District, but far enough off the main paths that I wouldn't run into many hikers. I found it on an old hiking forum. A guy had written about a flat, grassy clearing near an abandoned railway tunnel just outside a small village called Barleywell. From what I could gather, the area had been overlooked by most campers because it was a bit of a pain to get to and there was no signage. But I liked that. I packed my gear into my old silver Ford Transit van, brought enough food and water for 4 days, and left on a Thursday morning. It was a gray day, but the forecast promised a few dry, chilly nights ahead. I reached the edge of Barleywell around midday. It was one of those tiny countryside villages where most houses looked untouched since the 70s. I passed a pub, a mechanic's shop, and a boarded-up convenience store before turning onto a narrow lane lined with dry stone walls and overgrown brambles. There were no signs pointing toward the old railway, so I relied on screenshots of the directions I'd saved from the forum. Eventually, the asphalt gave way to gravel and then just packed dirt. I followed it slowly for another 10 minutes, heart thumping with excitement every time my tires slipped in the mud or knocked against a rock. At the end of the trail, the land opened up. I stopped the van at the edge of a clearing. It was perfect, just as described. A wide space surrounded by pine trees, soft grass underfoot, and about 100 meters away, a dark mouth of a railway tunnel half collapsed and covered in moss. It was quiet. The only sounds were wind rustling the trees and the occasional crow cawing overhead. No other cars.
No litter.
No signs anyone had camped there in ages. I parked the van facing the woods so that my back doors would open toward the clearing. I kept everything minimal: one-man tent, sleeping bag, propane stove, folding chair, and a couple of coolers. After setting up the tent, I went on a short walk just to get my bearings. The trees around were dense but not impassable. The tunnel, though, made me pause. It was bigger than I expected, probably used by freight trains decades ago. You couldn't see more than 5 feet inside it. I didn't plan on going near it at night, just admired the history of it in passing and walked on. That first night was peaceful. I made a hot meal on the stove and ate it by the van, listening to the owls and watching the trees sway. No reception out there, so I read from a paperback I'd brought and turned in around 10. It was cold, but I'd packed for worse. I slept better than I had in weeks. The second day started off great. I went for a long walk through the woods, found an old crumbling stone wall buried under vines, maybe part of a farm boundary from years ago. I took photos of mushrooms and weird-looking plants, boiled water from a stream with my filter kit just to try it out, and spent the afternoon sketching in my notebook. But around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. I was back at the clearing when I saw a set of boot prints in the soft earth near the side of my van. I always walk in trail shoes with a very distinctive pattern on the soles, wide tread, very angular. These prints were different, bigger, rounded heel, flat sole, definitely a boot of some kind. I looked around and didn't see anyone. The trees stood still, windless. I walked in a widening circle from the van, but couldn't find any more prints leading to or away. Just that one set. It was as if someone had stepped out of the woods, stood there, and then vanished. I told myself it could have been from earlier. Maybe I didn't notice them yesterday, but I'd cleared the ground around the van myself and set up the chair nearby. I would have seen them. I tried not to think about it too much, but something shifted in me that afternoon. I wasn't totally relaxed anymore. I went back to the van and moved the chair, scanned the woods more often, listened harder. The feeling didn't go away. That night, I didn't sleep as well. Around midnight, I heard soft snapping sounds, twigs breaking, maybe 10 meters from the tent. I stayed still. My flashlight was next to me, but I didn't turn it on. I waited, heart pounding so loud I thought whatever was outside could hear it. The sounds continued for a few minutes, then stopped. I stayed awake for hours after that, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. Morning came, and I emerged from the tent stiff and cold. I walked around the campsite. There were no new prints, but my chair had been moved. Not a lot, just rotated maybe 90 degrees, now facing away from the van toward the woods. I hadn't touched it since the night before. It wasn't the wind. The chair was low and heavy enough that it'd take a nudge. I was shaken. I almost packed up right then, but part of me didn't want to run. I still had one full day left, and I thought if I stayed alert and careful, it'd be fine. I decided to sleep inside the van that night instead of the tent. I moved everything back in, sleeping bag, stove, coolers, and locked the doors from the inside. I figured that would be enough to make me feel safe. By evening, the air had dropped 10 degrees and the woods looked darker than before. I barely touched my dinner. I kept the lights off in the van and stayed under the blanket with a headlamp on, reading and checking the windows every 5 minutes. Around 11 p.m., I heard footsteps again, this time on the gravel behind the van. Slow, deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch. I turned off the headlamp and slid quietly onto my stomach, peeking up through the back windows. There was a man standing near the edge of the clearing, just beyond the tunnel's entrance. I could barely see him, but enough to know he wasn't a hiker. He wore something like a dark trench coat, tall still, not moving, just watching. He didn't carry a flashlight, and he didn't speak or make noise, just stood there. I waited, breath shallow, not moving a muscle. After maybe 10 minutes, he walked back toward the tunnel and disappeared behind a tree. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even close my eyes. I kept listening, kept watching, kept waiting for more sounds. Nothing came. By sunrise, I was out of there. I didn't pack up properly. I threw the tent in the van half folded, left trash I'd normally carry out, didn't even check to make sure I had everything. I just got in, locked the doors, and drove until I hit pavement again. I didn't stop until I reached a petrol station an hour away, where I sat in the car park, hands shaking. I didn't report it. What would I say? That I saw a man standing in the woods and some footprints? That my chair got moved? Nothing illegal had happened. But I know what I felt. That I was being watched, hunted even. That someone knew I was alone out there and came closer than I ever want to think about again. Weeks later, out of curiosity, I searched online for anything about the area. I found one forum thread from a guy back in 2007 who'd camped near Barleywell and mentioned seeing someone near the tunnel at night. No details, no follow-up. Just a single post, never replied to. I haven't been camping alone since. I still love the outdoors, but only in groups now, and never too far from help. And I've sold the van. Something about sleeping in it again makes my skin crawl. Every time I think about it, I remember those slow footsteps, that figure in the trench coat, and the way the chair was turned, like someone had been sitting there watching me sleep. I learned something important on that trip. The woods are peaceful, sure, but they're also lonely, and sometimes when you're too far out, you're not as alone as you think. It was in late October of 2016, somewhere just outside of Franklin, North Carolina, when my brother Kyle and I decided to go camping up in the Nantahala National Forest. I was 26 at the time, and Kyle was 24. We hadn't done a proper camping trip together since we were teenagers, and both of us were burnt out from our jobs. He was working long hours in construction, and I had just gotten through a string of overnight shifts at the warehouse I worked at. We both needed a break. We had a long weekend off, and with the fall weather rolling in, the timing felt perfect. We packed up early on a Friday morning. The sky was overcast, but the forecast had only called for scattered showers later in the night, so we didn't think much of it. We loaded up Kyle's old 4Runner with our tent, 2 backpacks full of clothes and food, a cooler, a couple of knives, headlamps, a tarp, and some emergency supplies. We didn't bring much else, just the basics. The plan was simple. Hike a couple miles into the forest, find a quiet place away from the main trails, set up camp, spend 2 nights, and head back Sunday morning. We drove about 40 minutes out of Franklin, then turned onto a narrow gravel road that climbed steeply into the forest. It twisted through thick trees and curved around drops with no guardrails. After about 20 minutes of slow, bumpy driving, we pulled off onto a clearing just big enough to leave the truck. We threw our packs on and started the hike. The air was cool and heavy, the kind of chill that sits low in your clothes and creeps in slowly. Everything smelled like wet leaves and pine. The trail was barely marked. We followed an old forestry road that had clearly been used at some point, but now it was mostly overgrown with tall grass and fallen branches. Every so often, we stopped to check our surroundings and make sure we weren't circling back. It was mostly uphill, and even though the sky was still gray, we were sweating through our shirts from the effort. After about 2 hours, we found a good spot. It was off the trail, tucked behind a small ridge with thick trees all around. There was a flat area covered in pine needles and soft dirt, and a little drop-off that overlooked a dry creek bed about 10 feet down. It was quiet, no other campsites, no signs of people. We set up the tent under a few tall firs and tied the tarp between 2 trees in case it rained. The fire pit was just a ring of rocks we built ourselves. By the time the sun started going down, we had everything set. We cooked some canned chili on a little camp stove, ate in silence, and leaned back against a log, listening to the trees groan in the wind. The quiet was deep. No cars, no voices, not even birds once it got dark. Just the wind brushing the branches and the occasional cracking of wood shifting in the cold. I remember feeling calm in a way I hadn't in years. No phone service, no work, just me and my brother out in the woods like we used to be when we were kids. Around 10 that night, it started to rain. Light at first, just a soft tapping on the tarp overhead, but it picked up fast. Within half an hour, It turned into a steady, cold downpour. We crawled into the tent and zipped up the rainfly. We were both dry, but I could hear the rain hammering down harder than I expected. The kind that hits in sheets and bounces off the ground. The tarp outside flapped in the wind, and every now and then I could hear a branch crack somewhere nearby. We laid there for a while, just listening. The tent lit up in pulses from our small battery lantern. I had a hard time falling asleep, not from fear, just from how loud the rain had gotten. At one point, I reached over to check the seams of the tent. No leaks, but the ground under us felt like it was softening, like the earth was slowly turning to mud. Sometime after midnight, I heard a weird noise outside. It wasn't the rain. It was a different kind of sound. Sharp, like something snapping hard underfoot. Not a branch falling from above, but something heavy stepping on dry wood. Came from down near the creek bed. I froze for a second and looked over at Kyle. He had already propped himself up on his elbow and was staring at me. Neither of us said a word. We just listened. The noise came again. Another snap, followed by a dragging sound. Then silence. The rain was still falling hard, but there was definitely something moving out there. Something alive. My first thought was a deer or maybe even a bear, but it didn't sound like any animal I knew. The movements were slow, purposeful, like it was stepping carefully but still making a lot of noise. I reached into my bag and pulled out my headlamp and knife. Kyle did the same. We stayed like that for a few minutes. Lights off, knives in hand, just listening. Then another sound, this time closer, not even 50 feet away. It sounded like something brushing up against tree bark. Then another heavy step. The creek bed was only 10 feet down from where our tent sat, and the sound was now above it on our side, right near us. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to turn the light on and give away our position, but at the same time, I hated not knowing what was out there. Kyle slowly unzipped the tent and leaned out just far enough to peek. A few seconds passed, and then he pulled back inside and gave me a look I won't forget. His face was pale and he looked genuinely freaked out. I leaned out and flicked on my headlamp just for a second, sweeping the trees. I didn't see anything, just darkness and rain pouring down in streaks. The beam cut through the mist but didn't catch any movement. I turned it off right away and pulled back inside. We sat there, knives in hand, soaked in sweat despite the cold. More noises followed. Scraping, slow shuffling, and what sounded like wet footsteps moving around the tent. Not circling, just slow, steady pacing. Then it stopped. For maybe 10 minutes, there was nothing but rain again. Just as I started to think it might have been a deer or even just the wind playing tricks on us, something hit the side of the tent. Not hard, but definite, like a hand brushing down the fabric. Just one long swipe, right along where Kyle was lying. He jerked back, and I turned my light on, shining it at the wall of the tent. No shadow, no silhouette, just the wet fabric sagging slightly. We didn't move, we just waited. The rain kept pounding, and the wind got louder, whistling through the trees like a scream. Eventually, whatever was out there moved off. We could hear the sounds getting more distant, branches moving, leaves crunching under something heavy. Then, nothing. After about an hour of silence, we both sat back. Neither of us spoke. We didn't go back to sleep. We just waited in silence until the sky started to lighten. The first light, we stepped outside. Everything was soaked. The ground around the tent was muddy and covered in small puddles. We checked the area around camp. A few broken branches, some smudged marks near the edge of the creek bed. They weren't prints exactly, but more like deep spots in the mud where something had stood for a while, heavy enough to leave dents. We packed up fast. No breakfast, no fire, just tore down the tent, stuffed everything into our packs, and got moving. The hike back was silent. Both of us kept checking behind us, stopping every few minutes to listen. The rain had let up by then, but the forest was still dripping, and the fog clung low to the ground. Every shadow felt alive. When we got back to the truck, we didn't say anything until we were halfway down the mountain. Kyle finally looked over and just shook his head slowly. We never talked about what we saw or didn't see that night, but I know we both felt it. Something had been watching us. Something had gotten close. Too close. We never reported it. What would we say? We didn't see a face, didn't hear a voice. Just sounds and movements. But whatever it wasn't just some random animal. It moved like it knew we were there, like it had come to check on us. Maybe even wait. We never camped in that part of the forest again. Hell, we didn't camp together for a long time after that. When we did go again, it was always with more people and always somewhere familiar, somewhere close to home. That night in the rain, something reminded us how easy it is to disappear out there. How far the woods can go on without anyone hearing you scream. No fairy tale endings. No monsters or ghosts. Just the cold, real feeling of being hunted by something you couldn't see. And that's what still gets to me. Not knowing what it was. Just knowing it was real. It was in early October of 2022 when my boss, Rick, invited me to go on a camping trip with him and his stepsister, Amy. Rick was 45, a little rough around the edges, but a good guy. Amy was around 40, very independent and quiet. They grew up together after their parents remarried, but they didn't really seem that close now. I was 29 at the time, had been working under Rick for about 2 years, mostly helping him manage the warehouse for a shipping company in Northern Oregon. We weren't best friends, but I think he liked having someone younger around who didn't mind doing the heavier work. The trip wasn't anything formal. Rick just said he knew a spot near the Wallowa Mountains. Real remote, no official campsites, the kind of place hunters and old-timers used to go. He said it would be a chance to get the hell away from everything for a few days. At the time, I needed that. Work had been burning me out. I figured a quiet few days in the woods with a small group might actually be good. We left early on a Thursday morning. Rick drove his old Ford F-250, beat up but reliable. I followed behind in my own truck, a rusty Chevy that rattled when you hit 50 miles an hour. Amy rode with Rick. I had only met her once before, briefly at a company barbecue, and remembered her being polite but not very talkative. She packed light, same as Rick, just the basics. I brought my own tent, sleeping bag, a backpack full of essentials, and enough food for 4 days. The drive took almost 6 hours. Paved roads turned to gravel, and then gravel roads turned into rough dirt paths. Eventually, we pulled off at a small clearing surrounded by thick pine trees. There was a creek running nearby, and the whole place smelled like wet moss and pine needles. No other people for miles. No cell service either. We spent the first couple of hours setting up camp. Rick hammered down the tent stakes like he'd done it 1,000 times. Amy set up a small cooking area with a fold-out table and propane stove. I pitched my own tent a little ways off from theirs, close enough to feel part of the group but far enough for some privacy. It was already late afternoon by the time we finished, and the sun dipped low behind the trees. We made a simple dinner, beans and sausages heated on the stove. Afterward, we sat around a small fire, watching the flames crackle and listening to the sounds of the forest. The first night was calm. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the night sounds, the soft gurgle of the creek, the wind brushing through the trees, an owl hooting somewhere off in the distance. I fell asleep fast, the way you do when you're out in the open air, tired from working all day. The next morning, Rick wanted to explore the area. He had an old map, some hand-drawn thing he'd found years ago, that showed trails and landmarks not on any official maps. He talked about an old fire lookout tower somewhere deep in the woods, abandoned since the 70s. Amy didn't seem interested in hiking that far, so she stayed behind at camp. I went with Rick. We hiked for a few hours, cutting through dense trees and scrambling over fallen logs. The air was crisp and cool, with the smell of damp earth everywhere. We found the tower just before noon. It was a rotting wooden structure, maybe 50 feet tall, leaning slightly to one side. The ladder was missing half its rungs, and the wood was soft with rot. We didn't dare climb it. Just standing near it, you could feel how fragile it was. We ate a quick lunch, jerky and granola bars, then headed back to camp. Along the way, we noticed something weird. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just small signs. Branches broken in strange ways. Rocks piled neatly in odd little stacks. At one point, we found a shirt, dirty, faded, stuck high up in a tree like someone had thrown it there. Rick shrugged it off, said it was probably from some hunter or hiker years ago. Still, it put me on edge. I didn't like the idea of someone else being out here, especially someone careless enough to leave trash hanging around. When we got back to camp, Amy was sitting by the fire pit, reading a book. She said everything had been quiet, but there was something about the way she said it that didn't sit right with me. Like she wasn't sure if it really had been. That night was colder. I wrapped myself tighter in my sleeping bag, listening harder to the sounds outside. Around midnight, I thought I heard footsteps crunching through the brush. Slow, heavy steps. I held my breath, straining to hear. Maybe it was a deer, maybe a bear, but the steps stopped right outside my tent. I stayed frozen, not daring to move. After a minute, they started again, moving away, fading into the trees. The next morning, I told Rick what I thought I heard. He laughed it off, said I was probably half dreaming. I didn't push it. Amy didn't say anything, but I caught her giving me a look, like she believed me but didn't want to say it out loud. We spent the day fishing down at the creek. Caught a few small trout, enough for dinner. It was peaceful for a while. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe I had just imagined the footsteps. Maybe it really had been a deer. That night, everything changed. Started around 1 in the morning. I was half asleep when I heard something again, this time sharper, more deliberate. A twig snapping, a low grunt. I sat up, heart pounding. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and poked my head out. The fire was just a few embers now, glowing weakly. The woods beyond the clearing were pitch black, but something moved at the edge of the trees. A shadow, a tall figure, standing just inside the darkness. I ducked back into my tent, fumbling for the small hatchet I kept near my pack. I didn't know what to do. Yell? Run? I stayed put, trying to be as quiet as possible. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, I heard the figure moving away, heavy steps crunching on dead leaves. I waited another hour before I dared lay down again, but even then I didn't really sleep. When the sun came up, I checked around the camp. There were footprints in the soft dirt, not animal prints. Bootprints. Someone had been standing there, just watching us. I showed Rick. He frowned, suddenly not so casual anymore. Amy looked scared. Rick said it was probably some hiker, maybe a hunter passing through. But the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe that either. We decided to pack up and leave a day early. None of us wanted to stay another night. As we broke down camp, Rick noticed something else. His cooler, the one he kept padlocked shut, had been opened. Not broken into, opened. The lock was still there, but the cooler was empty. Every bit of food gone. Same with Amy's bag of dry goods. My own pack had been rummaged through too, though nothing big was missing. It was a clear message. Someone had been here, watching us, messing with us. We rushed through packing, barely talking, just wanting to get out of there. As we loaded up the trucks, I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there again. The drive back was tense. Rick kept checking the rearview mirror like he expected someone to follow. Amy stared out the window, arms crossed tight over her chest. We made it back to town by late evening. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window, double-checked them twice. That night, I barely slept, every little creak of the house setting my nerves on edge. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about what had happened, about how someone could just slip into your camp at night, steal your food, stand outside your tent, and you might never even know they were there until it was too late.
No ghosts, no monsters.
Just people, real people who chose to make you feel powerless. I still work for Rick. We don't talk about that trip much. Amy doesn't come around the warehouse at all anymore. I don't blame her. After that night, none of us were the same. Something about being watched like that, being toyed with, knowing someone else was out there, someone who didn't care if you lived or died. It changes the way you see the world. I haven't been camping since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will again. I was 34 when I decided to take a solo camping trip in western Arkansas. It was the fall of 2019, early October, when the trees were just starting to change. I had some leftover vacation time and didn't feel like flying anywhere. I wanted something quiet, something isolated, away from people, phones, everything. I'd been working nonstop at a small repair shop I owned just outside of Shreveport, and this trip was supposed to be a chance to breathe a little. I picked a remote part of the Ouachita National Forest, near the Oklahoma border. Not many people camped where I was going, not because it was dangerous or restricted, but because it wasn't well known. I had stumbled across it while looking at old hiking forums. One guy mentioned a small clearing next to a narrow creek deep in the woods where you could pitch a tent and hear nothing but the forest for miles. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light but smart. A 2-person tent, a compact sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, a good hunting knife, some rope, fire starter, a small hatchet, and my old .38 revolver. I wasn't paranoid, but I didn't go out into the woods completely unarmed either. I'd also brought a GPS device, a solar battery pack, and a paper map just in case. I left the paved road by noon and drove along gravel and dirt tracks until the trail ended. From there, it was about a 4-mile hike to the spot the guy on the forum described. It wasn't marked, but I followed a thin game trail he mentioned, which cut through thick trees and sloped gently downhill. Took me about 2 hours to get there. When I reached the clearing, it was even better than I imagined. It sat in a natural dip between 2 ridges, and the creek, more like a wide stream, flowed calmly at the edge. There was a moss-covered rock slab perfect for sitting on. The ground was soft but dry, covered in pine needles. I could still hear a few insects buzzing and some birds deeper in the trees, but that was about it. No motors, no other people, not even a distant plane overhead. Just trees and quiet. I pitched my tent facing the creek, gathered some sticks and branches for a fire, and boiled some water for a bag of chili mac. I sat on the rock and ate slowly, staring out into the forest as the light started to shift into late afternoon. I didn't plan on doing much else that evening. After the fire died down, I climbed into my tent, zipped it up, and lay there listening to the creek until I drifted off. I woke up sometime after midnight. It was cold, colder than I thought it would be. I hadn't brought a heavy sleeping bag because the days had still been warm. I layered up with a hoodie and jacket, but I could still feel the chill in my feet. Outside the tent, the forest had that frozen stillness you only get in the deep hours of the night. No rustling leaves, no animals scurrying around. Just silence. I rolled over and tried to fall asleep again. Then I heard a sound. It was faint, a crunch like someone stepping lightly on dry leaves. First, I figured it was a deer, maybe a raccoon, but it only happened once. Then it was quiet again. I lay there holding my breath, waiting. A few minutes passed. Another soft crunch, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, but kept it pointed at the tent floor. I didn't want to shine it around too early and spook a harmless animal, or make myself look like a target, just in case it wasn't an animal. My hand found the revolver near my pack and rested on it. More crunching, still slow, still light. Whatever it was moving carefully, not like a panicked or curious animal. It stopped maybe 30 feet from the tent, just out of flashlight range. I waited, no sound for maybe 10 minutes. Then I heard a single snap, like a branch being broken. Not big, maybe someone stepped on a small stick. I flicked the flashlight toward the sound and swept the beam quickly. Trees, bushes, nothing that I could see anyway. I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. The air was colder than before, and there was a faint smell of damp earth. I stepped out fully, flashlight in one hand, revolver in the other. I circled the tent slowly, shining the beam into the woods. No glowing eyes, no movement. After maybe 5 minutes, I climbed back in, zipped it up, and sat awake for an hour before lying down again. I finally drifted off sometime after 3 a.m. and woke with the sun in my face. Everything looked normal. My pack was untouched. No signs of tracks, no broken branches, nothing out of place. I tried to brush it off. Could have been a deer, maybe a curious raccoon that lost interest. Still, I stayed more alert during the day. I kept the revolver on my hip even when I went to the creek to rinse my face and fill my water filter bag. That afternoon, I hiked a bit up the ridge to get a better look around. It was clear and empty in all directions. No signs of people or other camps. I followed a small deer trail that looped back toward the clearing from another direction. It looked undisturbed, no fresh prints, no trash, no anything. When I got back, I made another fire, ate a bit, and kept the fire burning longer than the night before. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, that uneasy feeling returned, like I wasn't alone. I didn't see or hear anything strange yet, but my nerves were tight. I didn't go in the tent right away. I stayed sitting outside near the fire, scanning the trees every few seconds. The light faded. The wind picked up a little. It carried a smell like decaying wood, normal in the forest but stronger than earlier. It wasn't until close to midnight again when something happened. A sharp, deliberate crack echoed through the woods. Not a small twig this time, a real branch, thick one, the kind that snaps when you step on it hard. It came from deeper in the woods, maybe 50 or 60 feet to the east. I killed the fire quickly, crouched low, and pointed my flashlight in that direction. Nothing. Then I heard it again. Closer. Still off to the east, but maybe 20 or 30 feet this time. I crouched behind my tent, holding my breath, flashlight off, revolver tight in my hand. A few more minutes passed. No sound. Then, very slowly, something moved behind the trees just beyond my flashlight's reach. It was so faint I almost missed it. A shape, a dark figure, maybe human, maybe not. Not moving like an animal, though. Too smooth, too upright. I didn't call out. I didn't want to give away my position. I moved quietly into the trees in the opposite direction, circling wide, flashlight still off, using the moonlight. My boots were soft on the forest floor, and I tried to step only on soft patches of pine needles. I looped around and approached the back of my tent from the other side. That's when I saw it. A man, just a man, standing there near my tent, not moving. He had a hood up, hands in his pockets. He was facing the tent like he was waiting for me to come back. No light,
No bag. No gear.
just standing there. I raised the revolver and held my breath. I didn't want to shoot unless I had to. I watched him for almost 2 full minutes. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in the dark. Then, without warning, he turned and walked silently into the trees. I waited another 5 minutes before moving. I didn't chase him. I packed everything in under 5 minutes, stuffed my sleeping bag into my backpack loose, shoved the tent in without folding it. I didn't care. I needed to get out. I hiked out in the dark using the GPS. Every few minutes I looked back, flashlight sweeping the trees. I didn't see him again. I made it to my car a little after 4 a.m. My legs were shaking from the hike, but I didn't stop. I threw my gear in the back, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't look back once. When I got home, I reported the incident to the park rangers. They took my statement and said they'd check it out, but they didn't find anything. No camps, no gear, no other cars on the old logging road. Nothing. They said it was probably a drifter, maybe someone living rough out there. But the way that man moved, the way he stood there like he was waiting, it didn't feel random. I haven't been camping alone since. I still go sometimes, but only with others and never that deep. I still think about that guy sometimes.
No flashlight. No gear.
No reaction when I saw him. Just quiet, deliberate presence. I don't know what he wanted, but I'm glad I didn't stay to find out. In October of 2016, I was 27 years old, living in a small town in northern Wisconsin called Eagle River. I worked construction back then, mostly roofing and small home remodel jobs, and I used to spend a lot of time by myself. I didn't have much family around, just an older brother who lived in Green Bay and a few coworkers who I wasn't very close with outside of work. I didn't date much either. I was pretty quiet most of the time, just preferred being alone. That fall, I got into this strange habit of camping in unusual places. Not the kind of places people usually go for camping, like lakes, forests, or campgrounds, but weird, forgotten spots. I don't know why it started. I think I just got tired of people. Even the woods near town started feeling crowded with all the hunters and hikers. So I started looking for spots where nobody went. One night, I slept in an abandoned grain elevator. Another time in a half-collapsed barn out near the edge of Forest County. And then, for whatever reason, I thought about trying a graveyard. Not one still in use, but one of those tiny ones you see while driving old back roads. Rusted gates, crumbling headstones, sometimes only 10 or 15 graves. Forgotten by everyone except the occasional drunk teenager. I had driven past one of these spots a bunch of times before, just outside a little ghost town called Sutherland. Nothing there anymore but the remains of a church and a general store with boarded windows. About 2 miles outside of town, there was a little fenced-in graveyard up on a slight hill. The headstones were all from the 1800s, maybe early 1900s at the latest. I'd stopped once to check it out in the middle of a drive, just to stretch my legs. I remembered the place was quiet, like really quiet. No cars, no animals, just a bunch of trees nearby and some barbed wire fence running around what used to be a pasture. So one Friday afternoon after work, I packed up my gear, loaded my old backpack with a small tent, my knife, a flashlight, 2 water bottles, and some jerky and trail mix. I left around 4:30 and drove for about 40 minutes until I reached the old gravel road that curved around the hill where the graveyard sat. I pulled off the road just enough to hide the car behind some overgrown brush and started walking up. The sun was low, gold light cutting through the bare trees. Most of the leaves had fallen already. I could hear the crunch of my boots on the dirt and broken twigs as I climbed. The graveyard came into view slowly, tucked behind a rusted black gate that sagged on its hinges. The fence was maybe 4 feet tall, completely covered in vines and rust. Some parts had fallen down. It wasn't even locked, just had a chain wrapped once around the gate and looped through itself. I stepped in. Inside, the graveyard wasn't much, maybe 30 graves total. Most of the stones were weathered and tilted. Some had sunk almost halfway into the dirt. A few had crumbled altogether. There was no real path, just tall grass and patches of moss. The trees were thin but tall, scattered around the edge. No real underbrush, just dead leaves. A low breeze moved through every once in a while, but it didn't make much noise. I picked a spot toward the back corner, away from the road, where there was a flat patch between two graves. One of the stones read Martha Ellen Birch, 1879 to 1904. The other was so worn I couldn't read it. I set up my tent between the two, making sure not to step directly on any of the graves. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I just wanted quiet. It was getting dark by the time I finished, and the air was getting cold. I slipped on my coat, ate some of the jerky, and leaned back against one of the flatter stones. I don't know how long I sat there, just watching the light fade through the trees. The stars came out little by little, and the temperature dropped fast. It was the kind of cold that bites into your fingers if you stay still too long. I didn't light a fire, didn't want to draw attention, just stayed in the dark with my flashlight off, listening. First, it was peaceful, completely silent except for the wind in the trees. But the longer I sat there, the more I started to notice the quiet wasn't normal. It was heavy, like the air had weight to it. No owls, no insects, no rustling of animals. Just my own breathing and the occasional snap of a branch in the distance. Every little sound felt sharp. Eventually, I climbed into my tent and zipped up, keeping my knife nearby just in case. I left my boots on. I always did that when I camped in places that made me uneasy, just in case I had to run. At some point, I drifted off. Not into deep sleep, just a half-awake kind of doze. Then I heard something, a slow, dragging sound outside the tent. Not footsteps, something sliding over the leaves, like a shovel or a heavy bag. I froze. I didn't move or breathe. My heart was pounding. I waited maybe a full minute. Then another sound, metal clinking. A soft tap, like something striking stone. Then silence. I stayed frozen for a long time. I thought maybe it was a deer or a raccoon, but something felt wrong. Animals don't drag things. I listened hard but didn't hear anything else. Still, I didn't move. Maybe 20 minutes later, I heard it again, this time closer to my tent. A soft, low scraping, like fabric over dirt. Then another tap of metal. That was enough. I slowly reached for the zipper and opened the flap just an inch. I peeked out. I couldn't see anything at first, just shapes in the dark. My eyes adjusted a little. There was movement, a shadow just at the edge of the trees. It was a person. I was sure of it. Too tall and slow for an animal. They were bent forward, dragging something heavy behind them. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed still. They stopped and crouched. I heard the sound again, metal on stone. Not loud, but distinct. They were doing something at one of the graves. I ducked back into the tent, heart racing. My brain went in every direction at once. Do I yell? Do I run? Do I wait? Then I heard something I'll never forget. The sound of earth being dug. Soft, deliberate shoveling. Not fast. Slow, like someone trying not to be noticed. One shovel full at a time. I couldn't move. My legs were locked. My brain told me to run, but my body said no. Eventually, I made a decision. I grabbed my flashlight, flipped the knife into my hand, and slowly opened the tent again. The figure was still there, still digging. I clicked the flashlight on and aimed it. The beam hit him square in the back. He turned, but I didn't see his face. Just a hood and the shape of a man, average build, pale hands. He didn't say anything, just stared. The thing he was digging next to wasn't an old grave. It was fresh. I saw the dirt piled to the side, the disturbed earth, the shape of a body-sized hole already halfway done. I bolted, didn't think, didn't speak, didn't look back. I just ran through the graveyard, down the hill, crashing through trees and brush, flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. My boots slammed into roots and rocks. I scraped my arms on branches. I didn't stop until I hit the gravel road and spotted my car. I fumbled with the keys, got inside, and tore out down the road, gravel flying up behind me. I drove until I hit the highway, then kept going until I saw lights. I ended up at a gas station off Route 45, parked there, shaking, heart still pounding. I didn't tell anyone, not for a long time. I didn't want people thinking I was making it up or exaggerating. I hadn't seen a face. I hadn't gotten a plate number. I had nothing, but I never went back there. A few weeks later, I checked the local news just to see if anything showed up. Nothing did. No stories about graves disturbed, no missing persons. But I know what I saw. I know someone was digging out there that night, and I know it wasn't for fun. Whoever he was, he didn't expect anyone to be there. Just some forgotten graveyard off a back road in the middle of nowhere. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place, because maybe I stopped something worse. That night changed how I camp, changed how I live. I still go into the woods sometimes, still spend nights alone. But I never go near graveyards. And I always trust that feeling in my gut when the quiet turns heavy.